I welcome you all on this COVID-19 update part 2. Myself, Dr. Gopal Bahurupi Patil. I am working as a consulting diabetologist and a rheumatologist in Nucleus Hospital and Research Center located in Ahmednagar on Balikashram Road. I take this opportunity to pay a tribute to all the departed souls of doctors, paramedics, all the supportive staff and of course patient in this COVID pandemic. Your loss has taught us many things and you will be always remembered by all of us. Your soul will never die and will remain in the hearts of millions of people. May God give strength to the family members of those who lost their lives in fighting with this corona. In this pandemic, everything is new to us. I have worked in COVID ICU and noticed that there are many lacunae for a proper systematic approach for a care of COVID patients. So this PowerPoint presentation is designed to have a systematic strategic approach for a COVID patients so as to save the lives. To prepare this PowerPoint presentation, I have gone through all the research papers which were published recently and more than 500 articles which were published by standard journals like NEJM, Lancet, JAMA, Infections and many more. Research studies going by ICMR was also taken into the consideration for this protocol. Safety profile and efficacy of all the drugs were studied extensively. Drugs not having efficacy or needing more data analysis are not included in these treatment protocols. Again, this is a evidence based and it may change in the future as more evidences will be made available. Till this time, we are very much familiar with this coronavirus. Coronavirus is basically a RNA virus and it has three proteins: S protein, M protein and E protein. It is the S protein which facilitates the entry of coronavirus over the human host cells. Usually, corona infection leads to a respiratory infection. Coronavirus initially present into the animals. Now it has transferred into the humans and caused pandemic in the current era. How this coronavirus gains entry into the human body and how it causes clinical manifestation, you can get a picture of this in this slide. This is a cell surface and this is a ACE receptor which is present on the type 2 pneumocytes of alveolar cell. This is basically a coronavirus which is SARS-CoV-2. This coronavirus has many spikes. These are called as S proteins. These S proteins are essential to facilitate entry of coronavirus over ACE2 receptors, which then takes entry into the host cells. So this is a ACE2 receptor and the coronavirus getting attached to this ACE2 receptor with the help of this S protein. Serine proteases is an enzyme which also helps to facilitate attachment of SARS-CoV-2 on ACE2 receptors. Once the ACE2 receptors, with the help of ACE2 receptor, the virus gets attached to the type 2 pneumocytes, viral genome get internalized and by using host machinery, these virus start replicating and produces millions of viral RNA copies which then infects the other cells. So till this time we were quite aware that SARS-CoV-2 infects the host cell through ACE2 receptor which are present on type 2 pneumocytes. There was an article published in a Cellular and Molecular Immunology which states that this SARS-CoV-2 infection also infects the T lymphocytes through its spike protein mediated membrane fusion. In this article, you can clearly note that the lymphopenia might be associated with the increased mortality and this SARS-CoV-2 uses CD147 receptor which is present on the T lymphocytes which mediate the entry of SARS-CoV-2 into T cells. So you will clearly come to know from this diagram. This is basically a SARS-CoV-2. This is the RNA. This is the spike S protein, which docks with CD147 and gain access into a T cell. However, this article also suggested that though SARS-CoV-2 may infect T cell and render them ineffective, it does not replicate inside the T cells. So, to summarize, SARS-CoV-2 attaches to ACE2 receptor, which is present on the type 2 pneumocytes of alveolar cells of human lung. As it attaches to ACE2 receptor, it's downregulate the ACE receptor, and thus the level of angiotensin second rises. Angiotensin second is a potent vasoconstrictor. It increases the blood pressure. It also increases the vascular permeability, thereby leading to the formation of pulmonary edema and eventually ARDS. So the clinical manifestations of this virus are fever, dry cough, shortness of breath, myalgia, diarrhea, headache, anosmia and fatigue. Now in this graph there are two axes. There is a x-axis where the time course is plotted against the y-axis where there is a severity of a illness. Clinical manifestations depends upon replication of a virus in a host cell and immune response generated by the host cell against viral proteins. Clinical manifestations are divided into three stages. Stage 1, where there is a early infection, stage 2 of pulmonary involvement, and stage 3 of hyperinflammation phase. In stage 1, we can note only a mild constitutional symptoms, or patient may be asymptomatic as well. Symptomatic patient will have fever, cough, diarrhea, myalgia and fatigue. While in stage 2, patient started noticing shortness of breath, there will be evident hypoxemia and PaO2 by FiO2 ratio will be less than 300. In stage 3, there will be full blown ARDS. You can elicit systemic inflammatory response syndrome. There will be shock, cardiac failure and eventually patient can die. We don't want patient to suffer from stage 2 to stage 3. For that, we need to notify the patient is having exactly what stage, and a vigilant monitoring by a treating physician with the help of CRP, D-dimer, fibrinogen, procalcitonin level, cardiac enzymes and 2D echocardiography. And also, once we document that we are in stage 2, we can also use drugs like remdesivir or convalescent plasma to reduce potentially patients going from stage 2 to stage 3. So this is a immune response generated by the patient. Timeline of COVID-19 laboratory wise. On day 0, infection starts. Up to day 5, patient can get onset of symptoms. From day 7 onwards, IgM antibody will start appearing into the plasma and it will be there till 3rd week of infection. From day 14 onwards, IgG antibody will start appearing. From day 1 to day 28, SARS-CoV-2 RNA and antigens will be positive. That can be demonstrated by RT-PCR method of COVID detection. From day 21, IgM start disappearing. From day 28, SARS-CoV-2 RNA and antigen also start disappearing. Day 0 to day 5 could be a asymptomatic phase. Day 0 to day 7 will be a window period. In this window period, we will come to know the infection by only doing RT-PCR. From day 14 to day 21, the decline phase starts, but the patient still remains infective. From day 14 onwards, we can do a antibodies testing as well. Day 21 to day 28, there will be a convalescent phase. The patient will be still infective. So to diagnose infection, first 7 days we need to do RT-PCR. After 7 days, we can go for antibody checking as well. Clinical manifestations. So this was a paper published in the editorial journal of intensive care medicine by Gattinoni, who is a renowned critical care specialist in Italy. And what he found that interestingly, this COVID pneumonia or COVID ARDS patients behaves differently. So he divided the COVID-19 pneumonia into type L and type H. Type L is characterized by low elastase and it has a very high compliance, low ventilation to perfusion ratio, low lung volume and low recruitability, while in type H it is characterized by high elastase, that is low compliance, high weight of lungs and high recruitability. So you can note here, defect in the ventilation is basically a type H type of a ARDS, and defect in the perfusion, which is depicted in the at the base of this diagram, is type L kind of a ARDS. So type L and type H. Treatment wise, in type L we can ventilate the patient with normal ventilatory strategies where the PEEP will be normal and we can use a tidal volume of 8 to 10 ml per kg of body weight. While in type H we need to ventilate with conventional ARDS strategies with low tidal volume, ideally 6 ml per kg of body weight, high PEEP and plateau pressure should be less than 30. So in this article you can clearly know type H is a ARDS patient and type L is a patient having perfusion defect. So from this diagram you will clearly come to know this is type L and this is a typical ARDS, that is type H. Apart from ARDS, one of the dreaded complication of this SARS-CoV-2 is a thrombosis. How it lead to thrombosis we will see from this slide. After SARS-CoV-2 uses ACE2 receptors to facilitate its entry into the host cell, there is upregulation of angiotensin 2. This angiotensin 2 is a potent vasoconstrictor and it elicits the inflammatory response, because of which there is a release of reactive oxygen species. This reactive oxygen species increases the oxidative stress, eventually leads to endothelial cell damage. Because of a damage on the endothelium, there is a subendothelial release of 1 Willebrand's factor which comes into the circulation, and after getting attached with factor 8 it causes evident thrombosis. So there are many papers published suggesting anticoagulation is very useful in the treatment of severe COVID-19 infection. So this was a paper published in the Infectious Disease Journal where they said anticoagulation is a must for COVID where D-dimer levels are high above the threshold levels. So this was the paper which was published in the JAMA, presenting characteristics, comorbidities and outcome amongst 5,700 patients hospitalized with COVID-19 in a New York area. This was also a paper which was published in a thrombosis journal research. This is also stated that the severe COVID-19 infection is associated with endothelial activation and eventually to thrombosis. As we already discussed, as the two ACE receptors are downregulated because of attachment of these ACE2 receptors with S protein. Normally these ACE2 receptors confers endothelial protection and attenuates atherosclerosis. As the ACE2 receptors are docked up by protein S of SARS-CoV-2, there is an upregulation of angiotensin 2 which leads to thrombosis. So this was again paper published. Anticoagulation treatment is associated with decreased mortality in severe coronavirus 2019 with coagulopathy. So all these papers suggest that because of endothelial damage, there is a subendothelial release of 1 Willebrand's factor which combines with a factor 8, leading to the formation of thrombus, which is one of the major contributing factor for COVID mortality. Hence, anticoagulation, depending upon the clinical underlying context and D-dimer assay, is pivotal in the treatment guidelines. Now, apart from ARDS, thrombosis, there is one major contributing factor for mortality, that is cytokine storm. So how does this cytokine storm happens? So in this diagram, you will clearly come to know SARS-CoV-2 attaches with the ACE2 receptors with the help of this S protein. As the viral enters into the host cell, it hijacks the cellular machinery, uses RNA dependent RNA polymerase and produce millions of RNA viral copies. These millions of RNA viral copies again infect to the other host cells and elicits an immune response. Initially, innate immunity will be stimulated and it stimulates neutrophil, monocytes, macrophage, natural killer cells, dendritic cells. After stimulation, these cells of innate immunity, they also stimulates chemokines and cytokines. Chemokines helps in recruitment of more innate immunity as well as adaptive immunity cells to the site of inflammation, while the cytokines which are released like interleukins, tumor necrotic factor, interferons and colon stimulating factor, they stimulates adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity eventually leads to the stimulation of T cells which kills the viruses and B cells which causes viral specific antibodies, and thus the immune response will be built up. So these cytokines like interferons, tumor necrotic factor, interleukins and colon stimulating factors, they attaches to the cytokine receptor which is present on the cell surface of immune cells. As they attach to the cytokine receptor, it transcripts into the DNA, leading to the production of more pro-inflammatory cells and proliferation of immune cells, and thus helping to boost up the immunity. This transcription happens with JAK-STAT pathway, and hence JAK inhibitors can also be useful in the management of this cytokine storm. So the cytokine storm is immune response is more than it should be. So after an infection, immune response is necessary to fight the pathogen. As there is a dysregulated immune response, they releases multiple amounts of cytokines, chemokines and recruit more amount of inflammatory cells. This dysregulated immune response causes local as well as systemic inflammatory response and damages the tissues, thereby leading to cytokine storm. So for a cytokine storm, what are the structural groups? So basically cytokines are interleukins, tumor necrotic factor, interferon and colon stimulating factor. As the name suggests, interleukins, inter means in between and leukins are WBCs. So it communicates the immune information between the different types of WBCs. There are 35 types of interleukins, of which interleukin 6 is a major contributing factor in a cytokine storm. Tumor necrotic factor basically stimulates the immune cells. They are also produced by the mast cell, macrophage and the T cells, and it helps in the differentiation, growth and death of viral replication genomes. TNF alpha has a prominent role in a cytokine storm. Interferons, as the name suggests, it interferes for a viral replication. Interferon are of different types, and again colon stimulating factor, they acts on the stem cells in the bone marrow and stimulates the growth and stimulation of cells into immune cells into a specific cells. The types are monocyte colon stimulating factor, granulocyte macrophage colon stimulating factor. They also stimulate the differentiation of a dendritic cells and also stimulate the production of erythropoietin. The predictors of cytokine storm usually happens on day 7 or day 8 of infection. They are predicted by high serum ferritin, raised C-reactive protein, raised D-dimer, raised interleukin 6, deranged liver function test, raised triglyceride, high grade fever and a low fibrinogen level. So till this time we are much familiar with how this SARS-CoV-2 uses its protein S, attaches to this ACE2 receptors, gains entry into the host cell. After gaining entry, it hijacks the cellular machinery and start producing its viral RNA copies in millions. These millions of RNA copies again infects the uninfected cells and elicits an immune response, which is by innate immunity and adaptive immunity. So now we are discussing about the drugs. The first drug is hydroxychloroquine. In this diagram, you can see the protein S of SARS-CoV-2 and ACE2 receptors. As this protein S attaches itself to this ACE2 receptor, virus gains entry into the human host cell. Virus initially goes to endosomes, later on lysosomes, which provides nutrition to this virus. Chloroquine is alkaline in nature. It increases the pH of endosomes and liposome and thereby interfering with function of endoliposome that kills the viral genome. Chloroquine is a zinc ionophore. That means it allows the influx of zinc into the host cell that blocks the replication of virus by inhibiting RNA dependent RNA polymerase. Chloroquine also binds to sialic acid. Sialic acid facilitates attachment of S protein with ACE2 receptors. So chloroquine prevents attachment of S protein with ACE2 receptor and prevents viral entry into host cell. So the mechanism of action, it increases the pH of endosomes and lysosome. It acts as a zinc ionophore, allowing the entry of zinc into the cell, which inhibits RNA dependent RNA polymerase. It also binds to sialic acid, which prevents the entry of virus into the host cell. So there are many studies which suggest the use of hydroxychloroquine in the treatment of SARS-CoV-2 infection, while there are studies which also states that there is no role of hydroxychloroquine as far as the treatment of SARS-CoV-2 is concerned. So we will go through these studies and then make a conclusion. So this is a study 1 which was published in March 16, 2020 and reported from China, where 100 people with COVID-19 have been treated with chloroquine. These patients had less severe disease and shorter illness duration compared to those who did not receive chloroquine. However, results from these studies not yet available, nor do we have a lot of information about the type of people who received this drug or what dose they took and for how long. This was a study 2nd which was published in March 20, 2020. This was a study from France and they reported that there was a significant improvement in a patient who received hydroxychloroquine of 600 mg in terms of recovery and in terms of decreasing in viral load. This was a 3rd study which was published in March 31, 2020. It was also a study published from Wuhan, China. 62 people were enrolled into this study. The study states that cough and fever improved about 1 day earlier for those who got 400 mg of hydroxychloroquine for 5 days compared to those who did not get any. Additionally, pneumonia improved in 25 of 31 patients who did receive hydroxychloroquine. Larger clinical studies are still needed to better understand the type of patients who may respond best to this study. There are certain studies showing negative studies as well. So this was a study which was published on 24 March 2020. The study was from Shanghai, where 30 people were enrolled into this study. Half of them got a 400 mg of hydroxychloroquine for 5 days and half did not receive. At the end of study, what they found, 87% patients who received hydroxychloroquine was tested negative for COVID-19 compared to 93% of the patients who also tested negative but did not receive this medication. This study suggests that hydroxychloroquine did not make a difference in the recovery. Larger studies are needed to confirm the results. This was a 5th study which was published on April 21st, 2020. It was a retrospective study. This study suggested that the death rate were highest in the group that received hydroxychloroquine alone, that is 28%, followed by the group that received hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, that was 22%, and the group that did not receive hydroxychloroquine had the lowest death rate of 11%. This was a large observational study which was published in an NEJM journal. The study stated that patient with COVID-19 who had been admitted to the hospital, hydroxychloroquine administration was not associated with either a greatly lowered or an increased risk of composite endpoints of intubation or death. Randomized controlled trials of hydroxychloroquine in patients with COVID-19 are needed for better evaluation of this drug into COVID-19 treatment. This was a study which was published by Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, which stated that 4 or more doses of hydroxychloroquine are needed to reduce COVID-19 risk in healthcare worker. The conclusion of a study was a case-controlled investigation of the Indian Council of Medical Research has revealed that consumption of 4 or more maintenance doses of hydroxychloroquine had led to a significant decline in the chances of healthcare workers getting infected with COVID-19. Although the usage of hydroxychloroquine, the data in the Western population is conflicting, Indian population does favor role of hydroxychloroquine in treatment as well as a prophylaxis purpose. For a treatment purpose, the dose is 400 mg 12 hours apart on day 1, followed by 200 mg twice daily for 5 days. For prophylaxis, 400 mg twice daily 12 hours apart and 400 mg once a week for 6 to 8 weeks. Now, the only drug which has a very positive effects in the treatment of COVID-19 is remdesivir. In this diagram, I would try to give you the explanation regarding mechanism of action of remdesivir. As viral S proteins gets attached to this ACE2 receptor which is present on type 2 pneumocytes of alveolar cells in lungs, it facilitates the entry of coronavirus into cytoplasm. Initially, virus goes to endosomes, then liposomes, This virus uses ribosomes and hijacks the host cell machinery and produce more amount of viral RNA copies with the help of RNA dependent RNA polymerase and millions of viral RNA copies which upon release infects the other host cells. Remdesivir after given injectable from intravenous route enters into the cell metabolized to its active form, that is GS441524, which is basically a adenosine analog. Viral RNA is made up of nucleotide. There are 4 nucleotide bases in viral RNA. Remdesivir upon release produces adenosine, which confuse RNA dependent RNA polymerase and it incorporates it in the viral RNA strands and make the viral RNA defective, which stops RNA dependent RNA polymerase to work, which inhibits the viral replication. So this was a paper published in the Lancet journal, Remdesivir in adults with COVID-19, a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled multicentric trial. Total 237 patients were enrolled and they have divided the result of this study depending upon 2 major determinant factor. One is a time to recovery and another is a mortality. In a Remdesivir group, the time to recovery was 21 days, while in a placebo group it was 24 days. While in a Remdesivir group, mortality was 14%, while in a placebo group it was 13%. So with respect to time to recovery and mortality, this study did not have any statistical significance as far as the use of Remdesivir was concerned. So this was adaptive COVID-19 treatment trial. In this trial, total number of patients enrolled were 1063. They have determined the effect of Remdesivir depending upon time to recovery and mortality. So in a Remdesivir group, time to recovery was 11 days, while in a placebo group it was a 15 days. The p-value was less than 0.0001, so that was a very statistically significant. Again, in terms of mortality, the mortality in the Remdesivir group was 8%, while that of placebo group was 11.6%. So this was a paper which was published in NEJM journal. The conclusion of the studies were these preliminary findings supports the use of Remdesivir for patients who are hospitalized with COVID-19 and require supplemental oxygen. However, given a high mortality despite the use of Remdesivir, it is clear that the treatment with the antiviral drugs alone is not going to be sufficient. Future strategies should evaluate the antiviral agent in combination with other therapeutic approaches or combination of antiviral agents to continue to improve the patient's outcome in COVID-19. So the doses are on mechanical ventilator or the patient who was on ECMO, 200 mg of a loading dose infused over 1 day on day 1, followed by 100 mg for next 9 days. The patient who is not on ventilatory support, 200 mg of a loading dose infused over 1 hour on day 1, followed by 100 mg for next 4 days. If there is no clinical response, then we can increase the dose to next 5 days as well. Now the drug ivermectin, how does ivermectin act? Till this time we know this SARS-CoV-2 uses ACE2 receptor to facilitate its entry into the host cell. After entering into the host cell, viral genome uses host machinery to produce more amount of viral RNA copies. These viral RNA copies once gain entry into the nucleus, this entry into the nucleus is facilitated by importin alpha and beta 1. So in this diagram you will come to know this is a cytoplasm and this is a nucleus. After entering and replicating coronavirus proteins, once they try to enter into the nucleus, they uses importin alpha and importin beta 1 channels to facilitate its entry into the nucleus. Ivermectin inhibits importin alpha and importin beta 1 so that the viral entry into the nucleus is halted. So FDA approved drug ivermectin inhibits the replication of SARS-CoV-2 in vitro. So the summary of the study was, although there are several trials which studied that ivermectin can reduce the viral load in vitro, its efficacy in human cell is not known. So this was a paper which was published in BMJ journal. The paper was suggestive of ivermectin as a potential COVID-19 treatment from the pharmacokinetic point of view. Antiviral levels are not likely attainable with the known dosing regimens. So the conclusion, these preliminary data on ivermectin does not support use of ivermectin in the treatment of SARS-CoV-2. More studies are needed to prove its efficacy in the treatment. Now oseltamivir, mechanism of action of oseltamivir is, as we are quite familiar with viral entry into the host cell, once the virus gains entry into the host cell, it hijacks the cellular machinery to produce more amount of viral RNA copies. Once these viral RNA copies are produced, they are packaged and then they exits from the host cell. These packaged viral RNA copies exits from the host cell with the help of this neuraminidase enzyme. Oseltamivir typically binds with this neuraminidase enzyme and stop these viruses from exiting from a infecting host cell. This was an article which was published in Lancet regarding use of oseltamivir in COVID-19 infection. A Lancet publication describing 41 patients, 38 patients were empirically treated upon hospital admission with oseltamivir 75 mg BD. All these patients had a pneumonia and abnormalities on the chest images. Median time from onset of the symptoms to the hospital admission was 7 days. The median time from onset of symptoms to ICU admission was 10.5 days. Oseltamivir treatment was administered in 12 of the 13 patients who received ICU care and 26 of 28 patients who did not receive ICU care. There was no statistical significance between the proportion of oseltamivir treated patients admitted to the ICU compared with oseltamivir treated patients not admitted to the ICU. This was a paper which was published in JAMA where they enrolled 138 patients with COVID-19, median time of 7 days from the onset of symptoms. Of the 138 patients, 124 patients did receive oseltamivir. The dose of oseltamivir was adjusted based upon the severity of a disease and was not reported. The authors noted no effective outcome was noted after giving oseltamivir to the COVID-19 patients. So our conclusion is, although oseltamivir inhibits neuraminidase, it is highly specific in influenza virus. So it is extremely unlikely that oseltamivir would be effective in treating the SARS-CoV-2 infections. Hence, we do not recommend the use of oseltamivir in a SARS-CoV-2 infections. There are certain ongoing trial information. You can go to these respective websites and can have a search regarding oseltamivir in the treatment of COVID-19 infection. So the conclusion is oseltamivir is designed to be highly specific to influenza virus. Due to high specificity, it is extremely unlikely that the oseltamivir would be effective in treating SARS-CoV-2 infection. Tocilizumab. Tocilizumab is basically a biological agent having highest specificity for interleukin 6, which is a major contributing factor for the development of cytokine storms and once developed, highest chances of mortality in COVID-19 patients. So the trial was begun in April 7. Tocilizumab begins clinical trial for COVID-19 patients. Now we are much more familiar with how this cytokine storm develops. It is because of dysregulated immune response where the cytokines are released in an excessive amount. Released cytokines causes local and systemic manifestations and also damages the tissue. Interleukin 6 is a major contributing factor and tocilizumab specifically binds to interleukin 6, thereby inhibiting the further cascade of inflammation and release of other cytokines which damages the tissues. So this is the paper, research article, tocilizumab treatment in the COVID-19, a single center experience. So this paper suggested that the patient who had cytokine storm had a significant improvement once they used tocilizumab in this group of a patient. So our conclusion is, although there are limited studies, efficacy of tocilizumab are proven beyond doubt in COVID-19 cytokine storm, understanding the role of interleukin 6 in this clinical manifestation. So we do recommend use of tocilizumab in a patient of cytokine storm. Doses: first dose of 4 to 8 mg per kg of body weight in 100 ml of 0.9% normal saline over 2 hours. Same dose can be repeated after 12 hours. Dose should not exceed maximum of 800 mg for a single dose. Convalescent plasma is basically a artificially acquired passive immunity. Adaptive immunity can be divided into two types. One is a naturally acquired and another is a artificially acquired. Naturally acquired is active or it could be passive. Active, when the antigen enters into the body and the body forms the antibodies, it is a naturally active immunity. While the passive immunity, the antibodies which are transferred from mother to babies is a naturally acquired passive immunity, while the artificially acquired is active when the vaccines are given, and the passive when the preformed antibodies which are produced from a patient who have developed antibodies to these antigens, and these antibodies, ready-made antibodies, are transferred into the patient. This is the convalescent plasma. What is the eligibility criteria for a recipient to use convalescent plasma? First, patient should be positive for COVID-19 infection. Second, patient should have a moderate to severe disease as manifested by tachypnea, shortness of breath, PO2 FiO2 ratio less than 300, saturation less than 88%, and lung field suggestive of bilateral pulmonary infiltrates which were developed within 1 to 2 days and are involving the lungs by more than 50% of the lung parenchyma. So this was a paper which was published in the Lancet journal, which stated convalescent plasma as a potential therapy for COVID-19 infection. This was also a paper which was published from a JAMA, treatment of 5 critically ill patients with COVID-19 with convalescent plasma. After the treatment with the convalescent plasma, all of these patients recovered very well, and the recovery of the patient was significant. Who can donate the convalescent plasma? The patient's age should be 18 to 65 years. Patient should be ideally a male or a nulliparous woman. Patient should have a COVID-19 positive by RT-PCR with a symptomatic disease for at least fever and cough, and there should be a complete resolution of symptoms at least 28 days prior to the donation. Or if the patient want to donate the plasma, there should be a complete resolution of symptoms at least 14 days prior to the donation, or 2 negative RT-PCR from a nasopharyngeal swab collected 24 hour apart should be negative. Donors who have had transfusion of blood products in the last 12 months will be excluded, and the donors who have had COVID-19 diagnosis for more than 4 months will also be excluded from the donation. So how this convalescent plasma is used? After separating a plasma, it can be used as a fresh plasma immediately within 4 hours, or it can be used as a fresh frozen plasma for 1 year. Ideally, same blood group convalescent plasma should be given to a selected COVID-19 patients. If same blood group is not available, then AB blood group can give plasma to all the patients. For example, A blood group patient can receive convalescent plasma from blood group A or AB. B blood group can receive a convalescent plasma from B or AB, or O blood group patient can receive a convalescent plasma from O or AB. Dose of a convalescent plasma: the first plasma transfusion will be followed by an additional dose of 200 ml at 24 hours interval unless it is contraindicated. Hence, the cumulative dose of convalescent plasma for each patient will be 400 ml. Second plasma unit should be preferably from a different donor depending upon the availability of ABO compatibility plasma unit, or else plasma unit of a same donor can also be issued. There are certain expected adverse effects of convalescent plasma as well. Donor related adverse effects are hypotension, citrate reaction, hematoma, loss of consciousness, seizures, and patient also can develop allergy to as well. Equipment related adverse effects are hemolysis, thrombus formation, air embolism, or infection. While recipient related adverse reactions are acute lung injury, that is transfusion related acute lung injury, TRALI. Recipient may have TACO, that is transfusion associated circulatory overload. Patient may have anaphylaxis. Patient may have transfusion related transmission of disease. Patient may have febrile non-hemolytic transfusion reactions. Patient may have hemolytic transfusion reactions, and rarely RBC alloimmunization can also happen. Our conclusion is convalescent plasma therapy is associated with better outcome when used in moderate to severe COVID-19 infected patients. It should be used judiciously to avoid adverse effects of convalescent plasma. ICMR trial is going on to demonstrate its efficacy, safety, and outcome. We recommend its use in moderate to severe COVID-19 infection vigilantly. Now, the treatment aspect, as clinical manifestations depends upon the stages. Stage 1 where the patient could be asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. Stage B where the patient will have pulmonary involvement as a predominant feature. Stage 3 where the patient will have a hyperinflammation phase where there could be a cytokine storm, systemic inflammatory response syndrome, or patient might be end up into advanced ARDS. So stage 1, depending upon symptomatology, if the patient is asymptomatic or symptomatic. If the patient is asymptomatic, then tablet hydroxychloroquine 400 mg twice daily on day 1, followed by 200 mg twice day from day 2 to day 5. If a patient is symptomatic, then depending upon the underlying comorbid conditions like diabetes, hypertension, ischemic heart disease, chronic kidney disease, treatment scheduled as patient who is symptomatic and no comorbid illness, tablet hydroxychloroquine 400 mg twice a day on day 1, followed by 200 mg twice a day from day 2 to day 5, plus tablet azithromycin 500 mg once a day for 5 days. In an arm where the patient is symptomatic and are having underlying comorbid conditions, tablet hydroxychloroquine 400 mg twice a day on day 1, followed by 200 mg twice a day from day 2 to day 5, plus tablet azithromycin 500 mg once a day for 5 days. If patient remained to be hypoxic, if the saturation is less than 85%, then injection methylprednisolone 40 mg intravenous twice a day, and if the D dimer is high, we can also want to anticoagulate this patient by injection low molecular heparin 40 mg subcut OD. Baseline ECG for a QTC interpretation must be done on every patient who receives hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin combination. If patient is not able to tolerate azithromycin, amoxiclav or cefixime can also be given to the patient. Serum ferritin, CRP, D dimer for every hypoxemic patient must be done. If patient remains symptomatic even after 5 days of treatment, therapy may be expanded. If patients remain symptomatic after 5 days of treatment, therapy may be extended for next 5 days. Now stage 2, which is predominantly a pulmonary stage, without respiratory failure, patient should receive tablet hydroxychloroquine 400 mg twice daily on day 1, followed by 200 mg twice daily from day 2 to day 10, plus injection ceftriaxone 2 gram OD for 10 days. If patient saturation remained to be less than 88%, then considering a inflammatory cascade, we need to add injection methylprednisolone 40 mg intravenous twice daily. And if the D dimer, CRP, ferritin is on higher side, then injection low molecular heparin 40 mg subcut OD. If patient remain to be hypoxemic in this treatment arm, then injection remdesivir 200 mg on day 1, followed by 100 mg from day 2 to day 10. On stage 2 with respiratory failure, tablet hydroxychloroquine 400 mg twice daily on day 1, followed by 200 mg twice daily from day 2 to day 10. Injection piperacillin tazobactam 4.5 gram thrice daily for 10 days. If patient remain to be hypoxemic, then considering an inflammatory cascade as a major contributing factor, injection methylprednisolone 40 mg intravenous twice daily. Consider serum ferritin, CRP, D dimer. If D dimer assay is higher, then we need to add injection low molecular weight heparin 40 mg subcut OD. And if the patient remains to be hypoxemic, injection remdesivir 200 mg on day 1, followed by 100 mg from day 2 to day 10. Prone positioning should be done if the saturation is not improving, and if the patient is not able to tolerate the prone position, we can also intubate and can give a mechanical ventilation depending upon the ARDS status of the patient. Here we can also use a convalescent plasma therapy on the patient who remained to be hypoxemic and is going from stage 2 to stage 3 in spite of giving all the treatment residues in stage 2. Now stage 3, this stage has the highest mortality rate. The patient will have advanced ARDS, multi-organ failure, and may have cytokine storm as well. So the treatment protocol is the patient will be on mechanical ventilator, and if desired oxygenation is not achievable by mechanical ventilation, then patient can also be transferred to extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. Treatment protocol is tablet hydroxychloroquine 400 mg on day 1 followed by 200 mg from day 2 to day 10. Injection meropenem 1 gram thrice day for 10 days. Injection low molecular weight heparin 40 mg subcut BD, plus we can also substitute a convalescent plasma to these patients, and if there is a cytokine storm, we need to use injection methylprednisolone 500 mg from day 1 to day 5, and also tocilizumab 6 to 8 mg per kg of body weight. The dose shall be repeated after 12 hours. So the summary of this COVID-19 update part 2, patient with a severe COVID-19 infection may become critically ill with ARDS typically after 1 week of onset of symptoms. Deciding whether severe COVID-19 infection should receive endotracheal intubation is an essential component of care. After intubation, depending upon type of ARDS, ventilatory strategies should be decided with aim of keeping a plateau pressure less than 30 and tidal volume on patient's height. Prone positioning is a potential treatment strategy for refractory hypoxemia. Thrombosis and renal failure are well defined and well recognized complications of COVID-19 and should be treated promptly. Cytokine storm should be recognized, and which typically develops at 7 to 8 days of disease by screening criteria, and whenever available, tocilizumab must be used. Hydroxychloroquine should be used in all the patients. Remdesivir, if available, should be started when patient is on oxygen support and is not able to maintain SpO2 of more than 90%. Convalescent plasma should be administered after stage 2B if no response noted following the above treatment. In the summary, X-ray chest, serum ferritin, D-dimer, CRP, serum fibrinogen, serum procalcitonin, ABG, cardiac enzymes, serum triglyceride, 2D echo with estimation of pulmonary arterial systolic pressure should be done in all patients from stage 2B onwards. So thank you all. With the kind of information what I have tried to summarize you, I hope that information will be helpful to you for treatment of these COVID-19 patients and ultimately for a patient's care and patient's outcome. When the new studies and research paper will be published in future, I will try to make a COVID-19 update part 3 in future, so that all the evidences what we can gather for the patient's care will be made available to you. Thank you.